Have you ever felt like someone was counting on your destruction and been frustrated that you just didn't die? If that question made your heart race, you need to watch this video all the way through, because what you're about to hear here isn't just a story of overcoming adversity. It's a calling, a revelation, and perhaps a confirmation that everything you've experienced had a greater purpose. And look, it's not here by chance if this video has come your way. It's because there's a message the universe wants you to hear, a message that will resonate within you like a spiritual awakening. Before continuing, leave a like in this video. This helps this message reach more people who, like you, are struggling in silence. Subscribe to the channel, because here we give voice to those who have been silenced for too long. And in the comments, I want you to write the number 22. That's right. Comment 22 if you know that you are still standing by a miracle and that your presence is already a sentence against everything they tried to do to you. Get ready, because what comes next will show you that surviving was just the beginning. They set the date with the certainty that you would not be alive or mentally capable of attending. Every signature, every movement in the process, every whisper in the hallways and messages exchanged behind the curtains of legality carried the hope of a silent outcome: your absence. It wasn't just an expectation, it was a tacit pact between those who feared your testimony, the hope that life, time, or the weight of suffering itself would silence the only voice capable of undoing the farce. They didn't want a confrontation, they didn't want justice. They wanted only the relief of a permanent silence, whether through death, madness, or withdrawal. But that day arrived, and with it came neither a defeated body nor a broken mind. It was someone who had traversed hell and returned with eyes burning with lucidity. The presence that occupied that space was not just that of a survivor, but that of an ancient force, carrying the gentle fury of those who did not die despite all their efforts. The air in that courtroom shifted. What was supposed to be a formality became a silent earthquake, and every averted glance, every bated breath of those present showed that the unthinkable had happened. You had appeared. His arrival wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, a presence laden with memories, pain, revelations, and trials. Those who laughed in his absence now trembled at his return. The courtroom ceased to be a neutral stage and became an arena of revelations, because that day the truth didn't come on letterhead. It came clothed in flesh, bones, and an indestructible soul. From the beginning, what seemed like a common lawsuit hid a dark plot. It wasn't a lawsuit seeking justice, it was a carefully crafted ritual of exclusion, culminating in absolute silence. The dates were strategically chosen, the legal terms meticulously manipulated to cause confusion and despair. Each move was a symbolic shovel of dirt on his existence. They didn't just want to defeat him. They wanted to erase him from history as if he'd never existed. The paperwork became a spell, a document, a postponement, a false accusation. It was all part of a plan that involved more than laws. It involved energies, emotional manipulation, and malicious spiritual intentions. It was a war waged not only in the legal world, but in the spiritual backrooms of the human soul. What was being stacked against you wasn't evidence, it was tombs. But the grave they dug for you wasn't deep enough to bury your essence. What they didn't understand is that some people, when buried alive by evil, are reborn with roots too deep to be pulled out. You didn't just survive the attempted erasure, you flourished in it. And now every line of that lawsuit has become evidence against the one who dug it, not the one who was buried. They watched your seclusion with enthusiasm. The absence of words was interpreted as weakness, silence as surrender. Every time you didn't respond, every time you avoided public confrontation, they celebrated in secret, believing they had won through inertia. What they didn't know is that in silence lies rebirth. While they spoke, you listened. While they plotted, you watched. And while they tried to kill your narrative, you built a new armor with each attempt at erasure. In the stillness, you studied the patterns, noticed the movements. Silence taught you about the traitors, the cowards, the disguised. You mentally noted names, dates, and attitudes. Not reacting was your greatest strategy. They buried themselves in their own words, while you stitched together each fact with surgical precision. The silence wasn't desperation, it was preparation. What felt like exile was, in fact, a sanctuary of reconstruction. Now, when your voice echoes, it's charged with precision and depth. There's no shouting, no hysteria, Just a firmness that can't be bought, can't be taught, and can only be achieved by surviving the kind of storm they threw you into. They expected a deathly silence. They found the silence of strategy, and that is deadly. They didn't expect a direct confrontation. They planned a war of attrition. They knew breaking the body was difficult, so they chose to attack the mind. They banked on old traumas, poorly healed memories, and the repetition of toxic patterns. Every ignored message, every distorted conversation, every lost friend was part of the equation. They wanted you to slowly fade away, consumed by doubt, guilt, and pain. The most effective weapon against someone who speaks the truth is to make them doubt their own sanity. And that's what they tried. They created a scenario where everything seemed their fault, where accusations gained strength through echo, not through truth, where even time seemed to conspire to exhaust you. It was a theater of manipulation, where the protagonist was supposed to leave the scene without applause, only with a final collapse. But what they didn't foresee is that this collapse, rather than being the end, would become a metamorphosis. When everything fell apart, you rebuilt not only your mind but your identity. You transformed the ruins into fortresses and the rubble into bridges. They planned your collapse as the final act, and you transformed it into the prologue to the revolution. This battle was never a solitary one. While you struggled to maintain your sanity, there was a network behind you celebrating each new crack. People who came together not for justice, but for shared hatred. Your destruction became a collective bet. Some invested time, others words, some even financial resources, each with their own motivation, but all with the same goal: to erase you. They fed on your pain like emotional vampires. They whispered lies in hallways, planted doubts in innocent ears, manipulated stories until reality became unrecognizable. The plot was fed daily, like a silent cult whose dogma was your disappearance. You became the villain in the story they created, and each lie told was a coin deposited into the bank of your destruction. But there's something no conspiracy considers: the power of silent resistance. Your survival wasn't just biological, it was symbolic. It shattered the myth they created. Every day you breathed, every step you took, every night you chose to live rather than give in to the abyss, was a sentence against all who bet on your downfall. And now they reap not only failure, but shame. In their calculations, you were just a statistic waiting to collapse. They analyzed your past like someone observing a map of ruins, listing every abandonment, every breakdown, every emotional scar, as if they were irrefutable evidence that your strength was limited, finite, already exhausted. Their mistake was confusing pain with weakness. They didn't understand that there are souls that, when wounded, don't bleed, they germinate. That each fall isn't an end, but a transition to an even stronger, more lucid, more dangerous version. They believed your tears signified defeat, that your silence was a cry for help, when in truth it was the breath of a spirit rebuilding. They completely ignored the fact that there's a kind of pain that doesn't break us, it sanctifies us. And while they whispered about your inability, you silenced the world around you and listened to something much deeper, the ancestral voice of resistance, of blood that doesn't accept humiliation, of destiny that doesn't negotiate with evil. You entered a crisis, yes, but it was in this internal chaos that your essence was reprogrammed. While they waited for the collapse, the opposite happened. You accessed invisible reserves of faith, courage, and lucidity that could never have been foreseen by those who only see the world through the cold logic of malice. Today, this new version of you walks with the serenity of someone who has seen spiritual death up close, but refused to accept its end. Your resurrection was not an isolated supernatural event. It was the result of each night you chose to carry on. And the most ironic thing is that those who oppressed your soul today tremble before what they helped forge: a reborn, indestructible human being whose pain has become a weapon, a shield, and living proof that certain spirits not only survive, but transcend. They were prepared for every scenario except one: their recovery. They had a script, a plan of attack, a psychological timetable where each step predicted their gradual disintegration. Emotional fragility was one of the pillars on which they supported their entire judicial and spiritual strategy. They believed that the sheer weight of time, combined with isolation, would be enough to transform their minds into ruins. But what they didn't consider was that the same time that destroys also heals. That isolation can be an exile or a furnace of transformation. And that prolonged silence often doesn't mean defeat, but rather the gestation of an overwhelming response. As the days passed, their certainties began to slip. Each time you chose to remain silent and reflect, rather than react with desperation, they lost control. With each step you took inward, you became stronger, more aware, and more prepared for the counterattack. When the tribunal was mentioned again, there was no longer trauma. There was focus. There was no longer fear. There was calculation, and the simple fact that you hadn't collapsed became the first crack in the entire structure built against you. What was supposed to be your end was now beginning to backfire on the architects of your downfall. The plan fell apart not because you faced it with fury, but because you faced it with presence. Spiritual, emotional, and intellectual presence. The trial now took place on two planes, the physical before the law and the invisible, where true intentions are exposed. They wanted you absent. The fact that you returned more whole than ever became the sentence they didn't foresee. The spirit that rises again destroys any strategy designed to bury it. From the beginning, this date carried something deeper than a simple legal appointment. For them, it was a countdown. A clock ticking against your sanity, against your faith, against your ability to resist. Each day that passed without a response from you was celebrated as an advance in their dark strategy. But what they didn't understand is that not all waiting is defeat. Some are sacred gestures of alignment between chaos and rebirth. While they moved on the surface, you plunged into the invisible. And when that date finally arrived, it brought with it something far greater than a legal defense, a spiritual realignment. Their strategy was simple: let you collapse before you had a chance to introduce yourself. Your absence would have confirmed everything they said. But again they were wrong, because the same date that was supposed to be used as a tombstone became an altar. Instead of a destroyed body, they found a fully awakened soul. What was planned as a denouement became the beginning of a reverse trial, where every manipulated document, every lie told, every subtle attack began to reveal itself with surgical precision. And what was invisible began to weigh more heavily than any physical evidence. Your presence on that date became a spiritual phenomenon. Time became a witness, and the delay that seemed to punish you actually strengthened you. They didn't realize that the calendar can also conspire in favor of those who are resilient, and now, instead of controlling time, they find themselves controlled by it. What was supposed to be the closing of a cycle became the opening of a portal, where hidden truths became undeniable. The judgment date ceased to be theirs, it became yours. At first, all attention was focused on you, as the symbolic defendant in a narrative constructed to diminish you. Your name was spoken with contempt, your image distorted, your words erased. You were the problem, the disruptor, the piece out of place. They wanted the court to see you as an obstacle, someone emotionally unstable, spiritually weak, and legally defeatable. And for a time they almost succeeded. But the force of time, combined with the clarity gained through pain, placed you in a position no one expected, the supreme observer of the chaos they created. You studied every move like a silent judge. You saw where lies crept in, where truth was hidden, where words were distorted, and above all you realized that what was at stake was not just your name, but the right to your own full existence. With this discernment came power, a power that doesn't flaunt itself but dominates. Entering that space where everything was orchestrated for your defeat, you weren't a victim, you were a living sentence. And every glance cast in your direction revealed fear, no longer contempt. Today, what was once a prosecution bench has become a stage for a reverse trial. You are no longer under scrutiny. You are the moral thermometer, the spiritual compass, the mirror where everyone avoids seeing themselves. You are no longer the defendant. You are the reflection of the truth that haunts those who tried to bury it. The target has become the judge. And nothing is more terrifying for those who live by lies than being observed by those who have survived the truth. They weren't just mistaken in intent, they were mistaken in substance. They used the law as a cloak for modern witchcraft, where every clause, every legal term, every postponement was part of a dark ritual. The goal was never justice, it was confusion, weariness, exhaustion, a tangle of technical language designed to discourage, to tire, to sicken the soul. They turned the courtroom into an altar where paperwork replaced incense, and the coldness of the proceedings was used to conjure doubt and chaos. The problem is that you learned the language. You deciphered the symbols. You understood that what was at stake was more than a process. It was a pact of silence, a shadowy agreement between those who benefited from your absence. And once you broke the spell, everything changed. The power that existed in manipulating the rules ceased to function. The energy turned against the conjurers. Clarity became the antidote to confusion, and what once seemed invincible revealed itself as a house of cards built on fear. Now, every document they present is read with eyes that see beyond words. Every attempt to undermine you is converted into spiritual ammunition. They use the law like magic, but you became immune. True power, in the end, has always resided with those who understand that the spirit cannot be imprisoned by clauses. They played with the shadows, but you became light, and light, when it enters, dispels everything. During the silence, when the days dragged on and no answer seemed to emerge, many around you concluded that you had lost, that the delay was a reflection of your collapse. The lack of response became an argument for those who desired your defeat. But what few understood, and what your enemies would never have imagined, is that that interval wasn't abandonment. It was a cosmic strategy. It was the necessary pause for the alignment between what you felt and what you needed to say. It was a time for healing, for introspection, for building a strength that isn't born under pressure, but in the stillness of purpose. While everyone thought you were paralyzed, you were reconfiguring yourself internally. The wait that seemed cruel was actually a period of redemption, because you wouldn't just return with arguments, you would return with awareness. The delay they engineered to weaken you was used by the universe as a spiritual laboratory. Each day of silence was a new layer of armor. Each night of doubt, another step on the ladder of lucidity. When time finally moved forward and the clocks marked the day of reunion, you were no longer the same, and that was the greatest victory. They set the date thinking they'd find you vulnerable, and they found someone completely remade, replenished with discernment and determination. The time they used as a weapon turned against them. The interval they thought was the end of the line was actually the creation of a new path. A path where every step you take now resonates like 1,000 words. They wanted to silence you, and you used that silence to become unforgettable. It wasn't documents, audio recordings, screenshots, or witnesses that challenged their system of lies. It was you. Your presence, your sanity, your steadfastness, everything they bet wouldn't survive became the greatest threat to the house of cards they'd built. Because while they invested in covering their tracks, you kept the memory alive. Your mind didn't buckle under the pressure. Your feelings didn't falter. You became living proof that what happened wasn't paranoia, exaggeration, or fabrication. It was real, and that, for them, is terrifying. They were counting on forgetfulness, mental confusion, and emotional exhaustion, but you returned whole, lucid, and chronologically accurate. This destroys any fanciful narrative, any attempt to distort the facts. You are the living archive, the human hard drive they tried to erase, now intact, with all the data preserved. This makes your existence unbearable for those who built lies as a crutch. You disarm their speeches with your own breath. You dismantle their farces with the simple act of standing. And the most powerful thing about all this is that you don't need to shout to prove it. You don't need to convince anyone with theatrics. Your simple stability is enough to get the wheels turning. Those who rooted for your demise now avoid looking you in the eye because they know, you remember, you felt it. And truth, when it survives, doesn't need to ask permission. It invades, and no one can stop it. They thought they'd drag you there for public humiliation, for embarrassment, for ridicule. They envisioned you cornered, wavering, emotionally broken, facing a hostile environment technically dominated by them. But what they found was the opposite. When you walked through that door, you carried a silent force, an energy that reverberated in every corner of the room. The previously hostile environment fell silent, because everyone there sensed something had changed. The victim was no longer a shadow. She was a presence. You didn't need to impose yourself. The space recognized your authority. Your every word was charged with time, pain, resistance, and justice. Your narrative wasn't a version, it was the essence. And while their arguments sounded like rehearsed scripts, what you said was life pulsing in the form of truth. The courtroom ceased to be a neutral ground. It became the stage where the hunter became the hunted, where the disguises fell one by one, not because you attacked, but because your mere existence no longer allowed the farce to continue. The room where they expected to see their end became the setting for their revelation. And this isn't just symbolic, it's spiritual, because when the victim refuses to die, they become prophecy. And in that room, where control was theirs, now the discomfort is theirs. You're no longer asking to be heard. You're decreeing that your voice is inevitable. And that changes everything. The plan was always extreme. And even though it was disguised in legal arguments and the appearance of legality, the objective was clear: to silence you forever. And to achieve this, a conviction wasn't enough. They needed you to disappear. They needed the pain to consume you to the point of self-destruction. They needed mental confusion to push you to the bottom of an abyss of no return. They didn't want a legal victory. They wanted eternal silence. Because a corpse doesn't testify, a broken spirit doesn't confront, an absent person doesn't contradict. And this reveals the level of perversity at play. It wasn't about justice. It was about erasure, about eliminating from the narrative those who knew too much, who saw too much, who understood too much. But their mistake was believing you were fragile, that the weight of persecution would drown you. What happened was the opposite. You, even shattered, found strength where you never imagined. And you rebuilt yourself in the dark, amid pain, broken pieces, and sleepless nights, until you became someone who not only survives, but now threatens. You survived what was meant to destroy you, and that changes the game. Because now, the witness they wanted dead is alive, and more than that, she's ready to speak. The simple fact that you're there, head held high, conscious and firm, nullifies years of manipulation. You're the evidence they wanted to bury. And as long as they breathe, they'll know that your existence is a constant reminder that the truth always finds a way back. This isn't just the closing of a cycle. It's not just about you. It's about everyone who watches your story and finds in it a key to their own prisons. What you've done here is pave the way for a new understanding, that it's possible to face seemingly insurmountable forces with dignity, truth, and presence. You've broken the mold, and that, in itself, is revolutionary. Because those who suffer aren't expected to resist with lucidity. Those who are silent aren't expected to speak with such clarity, but you did, and now nothing will be the same again. Your victory, even if silent, is making waves in places where silence has always dominated. Others will be inspired. Others will remember that they are not crazy, that they are not alone, that what they experienced is also real. You became a beacon, a map, a precedent. And the system that thought it could erase souls with bureaucracy is now faced with something it cannot control: the living truth. The truth that bled, that was almost lost, but that survived to denounce, to expose, to liberate. This is just the beginning, because every person who hears your story will carry within them the seed of courage. Everyone who sees your resistance will understand that true justice doesn't begin in the courts. It begins in the soul. And you, by refusing to disappear, have started a revolution that will echo far longer than any written sentence. What you started is immortal, because it is true. And truth, when it resists, transforms everything.